Hello, everyone. My name is Jesse Johnson, again, with the Johnson Center of Community Excellence. I'm the president and CEO of the organization. This is our first podcast, and our topic for today is whether or not an education in the traditional sense is really needed to be successful. Awesome, awesome. Well, that being said, I am now going to pass the baton over to our facilitator, excuse me, for today's discussion. That would be our Vice President, Tina Shade. So, Tina.
Hey, everybody, and welcome aboard. I'm excited about this venture today and talking about various topics that, ultimately do affect multiple communities. For me, it doesn't matter where you live, where you're from, you have a story to tell. And there could be a benefit in any venture with your background. But there's always this topic of success and whether or not education is really important, especially for people that are from the inner city. There's always an argument about that in the discussion. So we have two people online with us, Darnell Johnson and Nikki Wallace, who have a connection to each other as well. So both of you, do you both agree that you have grown up in the inner city? Would that be a fair comment that you've grown up, was raised or born and raised in the inner city?
I was.
I was not.
You were not. Okay. So, Thornell, which inner city, what city, and explain a little, give a little bit of background of the dynamics of the city and which city is it that you're talking about?
I'm from the greatest city in the world, Chicago, Illinois, specifically from the West Side. Born in a single parent household with my two older siblings, my sisters. Um, Although my mother worked, we weren't rich. We weren't. I wouldn't even consider us middle class from what I remember. And the people around us, although our community was a community of working class people that pretty much owned their homes and everything, but it wasn't upscale. It wasn't we weren't wealthy. We didn't have a lot of resources available to us, but we made do with what we had. So that's um that's my background as far as coming up in the inner city.
Okay. And now, Nikki, I heard you say you were not raised in the inner city. Where exactly, what is your background? Where were you raised?
I don't believe that I was raised in the inner city. To me, the inner city would have been more like the Washington, D.C. area. I was born in Washington, D.C. I quickly crossed the border into Maryland. Did I grow up in an urban area? Absolutely. But as a child, I didn't know that, because it was just like a village. Back then, it took a village, and that's what it was. So my neighbors were like my second mothers, my second fathers. It wasn't like I can go to the corner and do anything that my dad didn't know about before I even got home. So was I raised in the inner city? No. Was I raised in an urban area? Yes. But again, my mom was a teacher, still is. She's a substitute teacher, and my dad was I don't know what he was. He was
He was a federal police
an
officer.
officer for the Department of Agriculture. I don't know exactly what he did. I knew he worked there. He had the uniform, he had the badge, but was he an official police officer? I don't know what they
He
did
was
there.
a federal police officer.
Okay, I don't know. Again, but like very much like Thornell, like when you are in that environment and people look like you and they are kind of going through the same things that you're going through, you don't necessarily think you're being raised in the ghetto or whatever stigma it is that they have surrounding, urban areas. So it was never, we always had Christmas. So that's my story. That's my background. I never really knew until I was much older and understood, the struggles and all of that stuff. So it was for me, it was I loved it.
Right. You know what? That's funny you say that because let's say this real quickly. I too was raised initially. I was raised in East New York, Brooklyn, which you don't get any inner city than that, any more inner city than that, but you don't realize your surroundings too much until you step out of the
Mm-hmm.
city, until you come out of the city. People will tell you very quickly where you come from and where you are today if you don't realize the two. And when you live in an inner city that's not a middle class environment or area, you soon learn the difference between the two. And there is a difference between the two, like you said, Nikki. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about Donnell says, okay, he had a single mother raised him. Were you in a single mother family home too, Nikki? Or just you had both parents in their home?
So I had both parents until I was a teenager. I don't know exactly when my mom decided to separate from my dad, but I had them for a great deal of time that I can remember. So I have those memories. Um, my dad then remarried, but my mom was always, active in my life, whether she was there or not. It didn't matter. She was there. So, I had two mothers. I had the best of, I had my dad and then I had my stepmother who at the time of me being a teenager and transitioning into adulthood, I didn't appreciate um, her role. It wasn't until I was an adult and stepped in those same shoes that I had a full understanding of the strength you have to raise someone else's child.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
I mean, I have both of my parents for the first part of my half of my life, but they were both very much active and hands on with me because I was like, I was the one. I was the one to do a lot that a lot of the other ones didn't do. So yeah.
So
And
both of you,
and
I
I can
noticed
testify that she did do a lot.
she did do a lot. Okay. So, and one thing that I noticed that you both said, one in the inner city, one did not grow up in the inner city, both, however, had working parents. What was the significance to you at that time, having working parents as it relates to education? Because what I find sometimes in the inner city, there's not a lot of discussion in some homes about education. You go to school, you come home, do your homework, and that's really for a lot of families in the inner city. That is it. You better pass your test, study your work. And in some homes, I don't know that there's even a discussion about that. So there's some discussion as to what significance or importance, how was the discussion or conversation about education presented in your home?
Is that question
Nikki
for
is
me? Or is
smiling.
that question
It's
for?
for both of you, actually. Let's start with you, Thornell, since you took yourself off the mic first, because Nikki is smiling because she has something to say about that.
Um. Well, the thing in my house was go to school, do your work, and then as I got older, you need to apply for the post office because that's what my mother did. There was really no stress on going to college because my mother wasn't college educated. Her siblings weren't college educated. I won't even say my mother. I guess my mother would have been considered a boomer, a baby boomer. So that was the working class generation. Did a job working for 25, 30 years, retire, buy a house if you could, raise your children, etc.
Right,
The idea of college or trade school, it was never discussed. It
Mhm.
was work, try to get what they would consider a good job
right,
and stay out of trouble. Um, and I could say I was very sporadic in school. I mean, I had the brains, but I didn't have the attention span for it. It's probably why I'm 12 credits short of a bachelor's degree right now since 1995. Just refuse to go back because I can't sit in class and pay attention to something that I'm not really interested in for a long period of time. So, um, in my house on the west side of Chicago was just go to school, graduate, get a job at the post office, or go into the military, which is what I did. Um, but that was pretty much it.
okay, which is very common in inner cities. There's very common, which is one of the examples I gave. Nikki, you laughed when I said that. What was the conversation like in your home as it relates to education? Even though you were not in the inner city, still just in your home, what was it about?
So with my dad, it was bring home good grades. He didn't care how you got it. He didn't want to hear your excuses. Don't come in here with anything other than good grades. And I did that. That was like too easy for me. With my mom was more because she went to college. I mentioned that she was a teacher, still is. She pledged, she did all of the traditional things. She protested, she did all of this. So she automatically in her mind just knew that that's the route I was going to go. Just because my grades reflected that. And we had never had a conversation about the military, which I ended up doing when I graduated. The military was more so of an escape route for me because as you do get older, you start to recognize and realize your surroundings. And I think the biggest motivation for me was a lot of my best friends that I grew up with were trapped in that space because they had gotten pregnant at early ages. So my entire mindset, I thought I was going to college for a long time, probably until maybe my junior year, maybe my senior year. But at that point, I just wanted to see something different, do something different, and I did not want to be trapped in that environment. So it was an escape route for me. And this is a true story. My mom did not know I was going into the military until the day I was leaving for MEPS. And when I told her, she drove to my recruiter's office, and I was literally on the bus, and I saw her. We passed each other, and I waved from the bus.
Wow.
That is
Wow.
the story. My mother will
Did-
tell you that right now. She had no idea, but I knew had I told her, she would not have been on board with that idea.
So she was driving up to stop you from
I
joining
don't
the
know
military.
exactly what she maybe to see me one last time. I don't know.
Hmm.
I've never asked her what was the purpose of her driving all the way up there because
Yeah.
at that time my MEP office was in Oxon Hill somewhere.
Hmm.
Rivertown or something. No. It was for like probably about 30 or 45 minutes away from her house. And we
Wow.
happened to be passing each other as I was on the bus
Hmm.
going to Max, and I waved to her from the window. And then I
Mm.
didn't talk to her until whenever you get the opportunity to talk from basic training. I think it's like week 4 or something like that. Who knows what it was? But
Hmm.
in her mind, I was going to college. And I never
That's so,
told her that I
yeah,
had already took the test. I had already, I had been doing this. I never told her
right.
because she would not have approved of that.
Guys, we
You
got
know,
3
it's
minutes
so
left.
interesting that the
Jesse,
three of us have similar backgrounds. All of us grew up in a challenged neighborhood, Darnell, inner city, Nikki, urban area, myself, an urban area. I at one point was homeless, and all three of us took the route of the military to, have some
Escape.
type of upward mobility.
Right.
Well, I can begin very briefly. I mean, the military for me at a young age, 19, it helped to cultivate certain, characteristics, strong work ethic, being on time, and responsibility. And for me, that was a very important point in life that helped me to propel into a professional career. I eventually did go the route of a formal education, but I don't equate that to like success. I think the military put me on that trajectory
Mhm.
to be successful. That's just my viewpoint, but you know uh, we can go round robin on that, and certainly Tina, if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I had never joined the military, but what took me out of the inner city was the military essentially because my stepfather joined the military. That was his escape. And he ended up being in the military for over 20 years. And so, but that's what took us out of Brooklyn was the military. So it's interesting that those all four the military in some way was the escape as an edge as a result of trying to get up out of the inner city. So Donnell.
Me going in the military had nothing to do with me getting out of the inner city. I'd have a problem with the inner city. I had a problem with my mother. I was trying to get away from my mother. Yeah,
Mhm.
I can't put it any plainer than that. I came up with a very strict, stern, overbearing, mean mother. You know, my older sisters are their older sisters, and they were gone. So it's like a separation of 9 years between me and my older sisters, 9 and 11 years. They were gone. So my mother didn't have three children to spread that angst and that frustration with. I got the brunt of it. So I went into the military at 17. I went in before Jesse. I went at 17 during wartime, and it was a breeze compared to being in the house with my mother. So it had nothing to do with being in the inner city. I was just trying to get away from home. That was it for me.
You all three of you
Well, Nikki.
are, and Nikki, yes, Nikki, you wanted to elaborate too on the military, taking that military route.
So I think I I want to piggyback off of what Jesse said. It did solidify core values that still stick with me today. You know, so that, as well as I yearned to see something different. I knew it had to be something other than what I saw on a daily basis. There's no way this is life, you know. Not that that was a bad thing. That it wasn't a. I don't want to paint a picture like it was a bad place to grow up or anything like that. But I just knew I was in a box, and I wanted to break out of that box. So with the military, it just exposed me to different cultures, different music, different just points of views, and still being able to have one common goal. You know, when you look to the left and the right, you don't see black or white. You see green BDUs. Period. Like, so all of this that's going on in the world, I don't understand, I don't comprehend, because when you're wherever, and for me it was Diego Garcia, and I didn't do much, but I did some. And it wasn't
Right.
wartime, but it was about to pop off again. We were willing to die for one another. We looked out for one another. So that's what that brought. That just changed my entire life, my entire view, and just a platform that I was accustomed to. It just changed everything for me. So that's all I have to say about that.
Well, would you three, and this is to kind of bring it back home a little bit, because I definitely think it was a benefit to hear a little bit about your background and leaning into, is it really necessary to have an education to be a success? Is that really necessary?
And I'm wondering if this would be a good place for us to, to pivot. I know our first iteration of this is a 30-minute type of a conversation, if you will, dialogue.
Mhm.
Maybe we can pick up and just, answer that question. I mean, I think there are certain areas that we've yet to touch on, like some of the challenges that we've all run up against, be it influences with others that were experimenting with drugs or crime, or I know I've, come across those challenges.
Mhm.
And I think it would be interesting to get the perspectives of everyone on the call here in terms of how they may have pivoted away from those influences, or any challenges that we all may have had that we could share on our next podcast. Being that we're at that 30-minute mark now, but I think that would be a great place for us to pick up again if everyone else is in agreement. And I don't know, Tina, did you want to say anything else? Anthony? Um,
Well, I wanted to get their opinion, and
sure.
before we end today, and then we can certainly come back to the subject matter and go into some of the other the ideas that you just spoke about. But I'm curious whether or not they do believe that it's important, or it is a matter of fact that we need education to be a success story.
Well,
And
I'll
then I
start.
can tell you what I think. Yeah.
I would say in 2025, it's not as important as it was probably about 15, 10 to 15, maybe 20 years ago. Am I still advocating for my daughter to go to school? Absolutely. Absolutely. Just for the experience alone. However, I think now it's more so of who you know versus what you have. So you can have all the credentials in the world from wherever, and it still, to me, boils down to who do you know? Who can help
That's right.
catapult you to where you want to be? That's my
I agree
opinion.
with you. I agree with you, Nikki, 110%. I'll add on to that, but let's see what Thornell has to say, because I agree with you there.
I mean,
It's a, it's
my
a little bit about what is a little bit about education, but it's a lot of who you know.
my first question would be to clarify: are we talking about formal education as far as going to school, getting a degree like that? If we talking about that as that being defined as education, and I say absolutely not. In this day and age, absolutely not. Um, should you know things? Yes. You can acquire that knowledge for free nowadays. You can acquire certifications for free nowadays. You don't have to go and have any kind of formal class training to get a associate's degree, a bachelor's degree. If you want to go in a particular field, yes, but to just say you need education to be successful, absolutely not. I don't agree with that at all. Um, just for starters, for instance, a company, and I won't be specific with the companies, and people can ask me off air, but there are companies right now that are offering 100% free training online that will give you certifications to put on your resume that you can go into the workforce and gain gainful employment, or you could start a business on your own from these certifications with these training programs. Um, I think our modern day American education system, especially higher education system, is nothing but a way to get you into debt. We've sold the idea of going out, getting a college education. College is not free. So people are taking out student loans. You have a lifelong, at least 30-year debt that'll be hanging over your head. And you have people that have these degrees that are working in fields that have nothing to do with what they went to school for. So my opinion, based on my experience, is a formal education, as far as a college degree or something like that, is not necessary to be successful.
Now, I have a counterpoint in closing to that.
We'll definitely debate that.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's do it. What I will say is it really depends on your dream, your aspirations, as to whether or not that education is a requirement. There are so many different avenues, and Connell, Nikki, both of you will appreciate this because our dad said this to me. He said, there's always a way from point A to point B. Either you go over the wall, you go around it, you go under it, or you go through it. But there's always a way from point A to point B. And where I'm going with that is, Daniel, you brought up a really important point with the costs associated with the college education. But now, if I want to be a lawyer, if I want to be a doctor, I have to go through that route,
Sure.
or a teacher. So there are other ways aside from, the traditional, student loan path that you can get to that ultimate goal. Granted, it can be hard, it could be difficult. Maybe some would say it's impossible depending on the person,
Yeah.
but not necessarily an insurmountable goal. So I'm going to stop there because part of what we're looking to do is have some push and pull, a little fierce debate. And we can tee that up on our next call, being that we're about 33 minutes in now.